Okay, welcome everybody to this research seminar with our own Olle Hammar, who's been here, I think, since February 2021, perhaps?
Perhaps,
Like
yes. Yes.
He's also an assistant professor in economics at Linnaeus University, but in Växjö, not Kalmar. Okay. He got his Ph.D. in economics from Uppsala University on a thesis, The Mystery of Inequality, Essays on Culture, Development and Distribution. And the supervisor was the same as one of the co-authors here, Daniel Waldenström, and also Niklas Bengtsson. And today you're going to talking about rethinking global wealth inequality, the role of human capital. The floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, and great to be here. Great to be home. And yes, I'm going to present this project that we've been working on for quite a while. So as you will see, there's a lot of data work that we've been doing for a long time. But we're now writing together, like the idea is to get a working paper out here before the summer, as the usual aims and deadlines. But there are also some conceptual contributions here, which I think would be great to get your input on, since you are from various fields. And as mentioned, this is joint work with Daniel Waldenström. And the title is Rethinking Global Wealth Inequality, Role of Human Capital. And for me, it's fine if you have questions along the way, but we could also wait with them until the end. So, to be an economist here, and you find a quote that you can use by Adam Smith. Of course, you try to add this here. So this is sort of before telling you what we do here is new. We believe here's to tell you that it's not new. It's very old. So this is a quote from The Wealth of Nations saying that the acquisition of talents during education, study, or apprenticeship costs a real expense, which is capital in a person. Those talents are part of his fortune, and likewise that of society. So the idea here is that human capital, or human wealth, which I will sometimes call it here, is something that is at least could be part of our definition of wealth. But usually that is ignored or neglected in both like conceptually, but also especially in empirical work. So our idea here is to try to add that on to what we normally think of as wealth, like financial wealth. So that's the main thing, the main idea of this project here. So this figure here shows you, this is just an example. This figure is taken from Twitter or X, but there are different measures of this and different estimations, but this is usually what the global wealth distribution looks like. So here you have the deciles in the global wealth distribution, and what you see here is that the global wealth distribution is extremely skewed. So global wealth is extremely unequally distributed. According to this estimate here, it's around 76% that belongs to the richest 10%. And other estimates give similar results. So this is what we know about wealth inequality for the world. So this is global distribution. So taking all, neglecting like countries and taking all individuals in the world as one global distribution, and then you see then you take the distribution of wealth among this global population. So all individuals in the world as one, seen as one country, basically. And then you see that it's extremely concentrated among the very, very richest people in the world. And that's wealth as we usually think about it. Financial wealth, but I mean, including housing and all kind of different concepts of wealth, but not human wealth. And at the same time, then we have human capital or human wealth, which in our paper here we define that as the knowledge, skills, competences, and attributes of a person, which enable them to work and therefore produce something of economic value. And the thing here is that we want to put a monetary value on this. So I mean, there are different. In economics, in labor economics, for example, you often think of human capital as education, but here we follow another approach, which is basically where you give a monetary value to the human capital. And we can discuss later where you think this is like the right definition of human capital, but I will sometimes call it human capital or sometimes human wealth. Currently, we're leaning more towards calling it human wealth, but it's basically taking all your knowledge and skills and so on, including your education, but putting a monetary value to it. And I will come back to you soon exactly how we do that. And there's been a large literature going way back arguing that this is an important dimension of wealth. And there's also been both theoretical and empirical work trying to saying that we should also add human capital or human wealth to our definition of wealth, although it's like an extension of the standard definition that we have when we talk about financial wealth. But for example, there is this report that came out in 2018 by the World Bank, where they estimate the wealth of nations, but also adding human capital to the definition of wealth. So that's been done. But what has not been done is looking on the distribution of that. So they basically try to do an estimate of the human capital in different countries and adding that to our normal definition of wealth. But what we want to add here is also looking on how it's distributed. So what is the inequality in this broader expansion?
Two questions, clarification.
Yeah.
So human capital does include your opportunity of getting something of monetary value from your knowledge, skills, and competencies, or how do you?
Yeah, so we will define it as the return to your human capital.
And how do you estimate that?
Yeah, so that will be.
Get to that maybe.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay. Then we wonder about health.
Yeah, so health will also be indirectly included here. So it will be basically what your income, your future income flows from today until you retire. And the net present value of that. So it means that anything that gives you an income of that will sort of be the stock that you have of human capital. We can discuss it again in sort of the next slide. So our argument here is that this is something that's missing in most distributional analysis, both within countries. There are some countries that try to include it now. So there are some OECD reports. The UK also have some international accounts to now try to add human capital to it. But usually it's excluded, and especially in these global inequality distributions, it's never been included. So here's another way of just trying to say what we do or motivating it. So when we look on income, like the flow here, we often separate it in a very simple way between capital income and labor income, and that we call total income. But when we look on the stocks, when we look on wealth, we're usually only looking on this, the capital side, so financial wealth. So our contribution here is also trying to add the labor side of it. So you could call it like labor wealth, if you want, but we will call it human wealth here, or human capital. So that's like the big contribution here, that looking on both sides of both factors of production, basically. So what we do is that we try to quantify the value of human wealth for the whole world's adult population and combine it with financial wealth. So taking the current estimates we have of normal wealth, financial wealth, and adding this our measures of human wealth to that. And then we estimate both national but also regional and global distribution of this new concept, this expanded wealth concept, and see how it changes the both levels and trends of wealth inequality when we also include human wealth. So that's the main question here. What happens when we add human wealth to our definition of wealth on a global level? So what are the levels and trends of global total wealth inequality? So when we add human wealth to the standard financial wealth, we will call it total wealth. And then we also will look on some of the sort of what are the drivers of the pattern we find here, what explains the differences between the levels, the inequality levels that we have for when we add financial wealth, and we will do this mainly by looking at the compositions in different dimensions. So the contribution here, the main one is that we try to do these estimations of total wealth based on microdata. So we will use microdata for the whole world when it's possible. And we do, by that we do an empirical analysis of wealth inequality for this extended definition of wealth, where we also add human wealth. Yes?
The human wealth, how do you measure it?
Yes. So that will be here now. Great. Perfect. So there are like two main approaches to measuring human capital or human wealth. And one is to sum up your investments in human capital. So that's basically the education approach. So you measure it as of how many years of education do you have, or something like that. So that's one possibility. The other one is taking the discounted net present value of your expected returns to your human capital. So that's the remaining lifetime income approach, and that's the one we will use here. So that basically means that we take what you will earn from today until you retire, and then we sum that up, but we discount it. So we calculate the net present value of that. So that's there are similar approaches when you talk about financial wealth, that either you sum up your investments or you calculate the net present value of your future returns to that wealth. And we will follow this remaining lifetime approach. So that's pretty standard, although you have this alternative approach of doing it as well. So the main a good thing with this is that we will get a monetary value to it, since the income is measured in dollars. And the other good thing is that it will capture everything. So it will not only be education, it will also be, I mean, your income today is also affected by other skills, or if you have on-the-job training or these kind of things, that will also affect your income. And I mean, you might have cultural capital that affects your income today, so that will also be captured. Anything that sort of have an effect on your income will be captured in our definition here of human wealth.
That sounds nice, but how do you, this is future, how do you calculate?
Yes, so that's you're always one slide ahead. But that's good. Okay, so that's what we do, and we take the market value to this. So that's like it's like the returns to your to what the market pays you for your human capital. That will be sort of the measure to it. Yes.
So is now income the human capital?
No, it's the sum of your income from today until you retire, but with some discount rate for the future. So it's like a capitalization of your future income flows. Yes.
But you include pensions in that too?
No, so here in what I will show you today, we will only include the pensions that will come on the financial side. So that those will be included in the financial wealth.
Okay, but they are affected by this. Future labor income.
Yes, exactly. So we cannot include them in both, because then we'll be like double counting. But we could take them away from the financial wealth and then instead include them in the. So yeah, we can discuss this in the end, because that's one of the things we're working on now. Okay, so just last thing here. So the thing with human wealth is that it's by definition invested. It's like it's invested in a person, which means that it cannot be traded or inherited, which normal financial wealth can be. So by definition, this will become zero when you die. And here in our main approach, we will say that it's zero when you retire. So, I mean, you could have, if you think about, you could have a slave market maybe or something like that. But in our definition here, it will be zero when you die. So what we do is ideally, we would like to have this for microdata for the whole world, all individuals in the world. That, of course, is not possible. So what we do is that we still base it on microdata, but we aggregate it up to sort of the smallest groups that we could follow over time and across countries and so on. So we do that. We take individual level microdata, but then we take averages for different groups, which will be a country, year, occupation, gender, age group. So that's our unit of observation here. It's like it's like men working in the service sector being between 35 and 40 would be one in Sweden. That would be one group, and then you have another group which is the same group but in another country, and the different ages and the different occupations. So that's our units of observation, and that's also where we merge our measures of human wealth with the financial wealth. And here's how we do this estimation, or the model we have here. So we have that the human wealth of an individual in a country, in a specific year, in an occupation, age, and gender group are calculated by capitalization of the income today and for the future until you retire. So basically, it's the sum of all income flows that you will have until you retire from today. But here it's also weighted with your probability of being employed both today and in the next period. And it will be discounted by the rate of survival until the end of this period. And then you have a discount rate in the end. So we will have a growth rate for the country, taking into account future growth in the country, but also discount rate, discounting the future. Yes.
You need microphone.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask why are you including sex or gender, and just want to know why.
Yeah.
And not other categories.
Yeah. So I mean, it's basically data driven. It's where we could find I mean, we would like to have this as detailed level as possible, but these were like the groups that we could find that were observed in a lot of countries. So taking averages for gender and age and occupations is like feasible. Exactly, and by that we can also follow the different genders and age groups and different occupations. So it's sort of a proxy for individuals, but it will be grouped because we don't have individual level data for the world.
Could you also say more how the discount factor, what is that based on?
Yeah, so that's something you can do in different ways. So the World Bank in this report I mentioned, they use 4.58, so that will be in the most estimates here. But basically the net discount will depend on whether it's higher or lower than the growth rate. So if the growth is higher than the discount, then the future will be valued more, and if you have a discount rate that's larger than the growth rate, then it will be.
That's lower than the market rate, so you must have some justification. The World Bank has a justification with that.
Yeah, I think they based it on some surveys where they ask people. I agree. It's a bit loose. So what we've done is trying different ones and seeing how much it affects the results. Exactly. Okay, so that's how we measure the human wealth. And then we also want to add this. So for these different groups here, we want to combine it with their financial wealth. And there so financial wealth data is more difficult to find than the income data, which this is based on. So for some countries, we actually have good wealth service, and we know it we can measure it for these groups. Sometimes we only have the capital income. And then what we will do is we will assume that your position, your rank in the capital income distribution is a good proxy for your rank in the financial wealth distribution. So in those cases where we don't have wealth data for these groups, we take the capital income data for these groups, and then we assign the financial wealth of those percentiles to the correct groups by using your position in the capital income distribution, if that made sense. So over to the data here. So what we have here is, so we want to measure this human wealth for these country, year, occupational, sex, age groups. And that will be a total of 1.6 million observation that we have here when we aggregate it up to these groups. And we base it on microdata, especially from the Luxembourg Income Survey, which is a collection, one might say, of microdata from on income from as many countries as possible. So sometimes it's based on register data, usually it's like survey based, but they have taken these surveys and put it together and standardize it so you can access this microdata through the Luxembourg income study for a lot of countries and different years. So that's what we do. We take this microdata and then we take the averages for these groups for all these countries. To get the occupation, then we will use this international standard classification of occupations, the ISCO groups, the level 1. So that means that we have 9 different occupational groups. And we will also have a separate group for the not employed people. So we will have 10 different occupational groups here. And then we take 5-year averages for the age groups. So we will do 5-year intervals from age 15 up to 64, since we assume this is 0 when you retire. And then we want to do this for the whole world. So we have to do some extrapolations for the countries where we don't observe this. But we basically take the microdata for all the countries we have, and then we do different extrapolations. So if a country is missing data, then we take the values from neighboring countries, but weighting it with differences in GDP per capita, and we do different kind of extrapolations here, and they don't matter a lot. But so in general, 85% of the world's population are observed in at least 1 year here. And for the one we observe and we miss some years, then we do some interpolations, and we can talk more about this. That's like a talk of its own, I think. But if you have questions later, we can talk about it. But the thing is here, so this is what we have for, we add this to this estimation of, to get the human wealth, with we take these, we use the distribution in the cross section. So if we take a year, and then we have observations from different age groups for a specific occupation, and then we take these profiles to do this estimation of what you will earn until you retire. Then we use the variation for different age groups in this year today, and then we use that to calculate your human wealth today. But in the next year, we will have new observations for the cross section. But for the future, we used what we observe for other age group in your same group, but other ages. That's how we get these profiles. So this assumes that people will not change occupations or countries. So if we observe you today, then we assume that you will stay in your occupation and your country when we do your human wealth, the measure of your human wealth. But in the next year, if you have moved to another country, then you will be observed in that country instead, if you see what I mean. So that's that. And then we want to add it with the normal financial wealth. And then we use data from Credit Suisse, from this global wealth report. And what they have is they have wealth deciles and the top 10, top 5, top 1 wealth shares for different countries and years. So that we have estimates of the wealth distribution in different countries. But then we also need to get their wealth onto these groups, and that's where we use these the distribution in the capital, your position in the capital income distribution, to place you in the financial wealth distribution.
Sorry, I'm not
Yes.
this thick. So the people you've been following, they haven't all died when you finish your study. So there, some people, yeah. So there will be some kind of probability that's coming in somewhere, and I missed where that probability came in.
So that's the survival rate there.
That's a survival rate. But
Yeah.
the probability of staying in the same country, moving, the probability of getting more education or not getting more, all that thing that has to do be part of this estimate of your human capital. And I didn't get where that probability came in.
No, so that, so I mean, the probability of getting more education will sort of be captured by that people in your group that are older than you, if they on average have attained more education, that will be captured there. The probability of changing country will not be part of this. So that we assume that you do not change country. But in the next year when we do distribution again, then there might have been migration, and then that will affect that distribution. But in your estimate of human wealth today, we will assume that you don't change occupation or country.
It might not affect your overall asset, but I mean,
Yeah.
your probability or ability to move country
Yeah.
depends on
Yeah.
a lot of human.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
No. So that will not be part of the analysis. But we have your probability of being unemployed will be measured here. So that's the employment rate in your age and
Which also would be affected by the probability of you can migrate or not.
yeah, maybe you can see it as being part of that. Exactly. So people that are unemployed today will get zero income today, but they will have a probability of becoming employed in the next period. So that would take care of, but not specifically the migration. Okay, so that's what we do. And for the financial wealth, we have the whole age distribution. So human capital, we assume, is zero when you retire, but financial wealth will be for the whole age distribution. And we have that from year 2000 and onwards. And then we also add it with other aggregates. So we have this, we need to have the size of these groups, so that we get from ILO, which have detailed data on how many people work in these different ISCO groups, different countries and years. So we take that from there, and then we multiply it with the populations in the country to get the correct number of people in each group. And then we had the growth rate is also from the World Bank, so that was in the estimation. In the main series, we do PPP adjustments, and we take mortality rates from the UN's data set on mortality. So what do we get with all of this? So here we still want to do the human wealth estimation. So we get all this microdata, and we get these kind of profiles where you have, so here you have age groups, and then each line here is a different occupation and gender group, and we get these for each year and each country. So what you see here is an example then. So this is the average for all of Europe actually in 2018. But for each country and year, we get these kind of profiles, which show you the labor income over your life cycle. So then we basically plug you in where you are. So if you're 30 years and you're in a certain occupation and gender group here, then we can do an estimation of your income until you retire. And that's how then we add this into the formula and get the estimates of your human wealth today. So that's how we measure the human wealth.
What is the lowest graph there?
Is it, yeah, ISCO 6 women or maybe ISCO 7 women? So what is that? Service or agriculture? Yeah, so 6 is agriculture, right? And 7, yeah. So I think, yeah, exactly. So I think it's women in agriculture.
Unemployed was not in.
No, so they have 0 here,
Yeah.
but they will have a probability of adding one of those, jumping in on one of those in the next period. They will 0. So we get all of these observed in the data, and then we use those to estimate your human wealth today. And then we get measures of human wealth. So this is also just an example. So here is measures of human wealth for different age groups. And here it's the average for men and women in all of Europe in year 2000 as an example. But we get these for all countries and years. And what you see here is that human wealth here will be higher the younger you are. It's like by definition, because it's the sum until you, or the net present value of your flows until you retire. So the younger you are, the longer time you have to accumulate your human wealth here. And you see here on average in Europe, it's higher for men than women. And we get these profiles. And then when you retire here at 65, by definition, your human wealth will be zero. And we could do extensions where because we do observe some income for also the people older than 65. So we're probably going to do that, and then then it will not turn to zero, but it will be sort of similar. So that's how the human wealth is distributed over the life cycle. And then we also add this financial wealth, so our normal wealth concept, and that has exactly the opposite profile, which I mean we know that it has, but I think it's often not discussed as much as maybe it should when we talk about wealth inequality. What you see here, so this is the red line here is financial wealth for different age groups, and here you see that it's extremely skewed towards older people, and that's because wealth is usually, usually it's something that you accumulate over the life cycle, so it will increase the older you are. So a large part of wealth inequality that we have comes from this inequality over the life cycle, not between individuals, but between different age groups. But here, so this is actually the global average. So this is the average for the whole world, and that's why you see this extreme peak in the end, because this is also affected by the fact that there will be more older people in richer countries. So that's why you have this spike. If you take it within the country, it's not as strong spike in the very, very end there. But what you see is basically people accumulate financial wealth until they retire, and then they consume some of it, but it will still continue to grow even after you're retired. So what we do is we add on these groups, we add the human and financial wealth, and then the distribution get this over the life cycle becomes this dotted line here. So then we don't have as strong of a pattern over different age groups. And here is just showing you the aggregate, so the amounts, the total amounts of the different kinds of wealth that we have. So basically this total wealth, which is the sum of the financial wealth and the human wealth, will consist to 2/3 of human wealth and 1/3 of financial wealth. So human wealth is twice as large as financial wealth. And so this is what we find in our data. So this is the average per capita for different years, but it's similarly what found in these other, like the World Bank's report and so on.
Are you talking about Europe here?
So the question was if it's about Europe, but this is for the whole world. This is the global average, global per capita. Yes, so human wealth is twice as large as financial wealth. Okay, looking into the distributions. So here you have the Gini coefficients. So Gini is extreme inequality would be 100 and extreme equality would be 0. And as we know from before, wealth or financial wealth, as we call it here, is extremely unequally distributed. So it's a Gini of around 0.9, and it's very high both for countries and a bit higher for the world. So here you have inequality for the US, and here's for Europe. So here we also treat Europe as one country, if you like. So it's like a regional inequality for Europe. So it's not the average Gini within Europe, it's the Gini if you see Europe as one country. So the distribution of wealth in all of Europe. And then it's slightly higher than in the US. For individual countries, they're lower than the US, but as a region, it's slightly higher than the US. And then the world is even a bit more unequally distributed. But the human wealth then, you see, has a much lower Gini coefficient. So human wealth is much more equally distributed than financial wealth, which is the green ones you see here. And here it's also a larger difference, so it's much more unequally distributed in the world compared to in specific countries or even regions. So the Gini coefficient for human wealth is somewhere here around 60–70%, and that's pretty similar to what you find for the global distribution of income, which is also the basis for this. And if we combine them, then we'll see that total wealth distribution will also be much more equally distributed than the financial wealth distribution. So that's the last one, the blue ones. That's the Gini coefficient for total wealth for US, Europe, and the world. And you see that they are actually slightly higher than for human wealth, but almost the same as the Ginis for human wealth, and much lower than.
Could you comment on the difference between Europe and US? One would expect that the more of a welfare state, the higher human wealth.
Yeah, exactly. So this is driven by the differences between countries in Europe, which are.
You took Sweden there. What would it look like?
Yeah.
Sweden, US, for example.
So then Sweden will be much lower. So it's So the differences between countries in Europe are larger than differences between states in the US. That's what's driving it. Okay, and here's, instead of the Gini coefficient, looking on different wealth shares. So here's the top 10 is how much of financial wealth for the red ones and total wealth for the blue ones are held by the 10% richest people. And here you see also that so in both US, Europe, and the world, the top 10 richest people have around almost 90% of all the financial wealth. But for total wealth, when we also include human wealth, then it's more around between 40 and 50% here. That's held by the richest 10%. So here we also see a more equal distribution when we add human wealth to our definition of wealth. And it's also driven by the fact that the bottom 50% have almost no financial wealth. And that's true in both US, Europe, and the world. It's basically zero wealth in the bottom half of the financial wealth distribution. And that's also one motivation for doing this, is that if you take, for example, wealth in Sweden, when we measure that, we will in some cases observe like debt side of, so we have student loans are included in your financial wealth, but that's because we don't observe the asset side. So you invest in your human capital by taking a student loan, and then we will calculate your debt there, which will be like your student loan, that will be included in the financial wealth. But the asset side of it, that's the human capital that you invest in, will not be included in this wealth definition. While in this total wealth definition, we will observe both sides of it. Here's another figure. So here you have the deciles in the global total wealth distribution. So the wealth distribution, including both financial wealth and human wealth, and then we see how large share in these different deciles are financial wealth and human wealth. And here you see the shares are basically an inverse U-shaped pattern. So you have quite low share of human wealth in the bottom of this distribution, then it increases. It's around 85% here in the middle and upper middle part of the distribution, and then it's lower again in the very top. So the very richest have a larger share of financial wealth, so 50-50 there, while in the lower part of the distribution, the share of human wealth is larger than that of financial wealth, except back in the bottom again, where the financial wealth is larger than the human wealth compared to in the middle. Okay, so trying to look a bit on what explains these differences that we find when we add this, when we add human wealth to the wealth definition. So here is one way of illustrating the age effect here. So this is the age gradient in the wealth distribution. So the red one is financial wealth. So you have the different deciles in the financial wealth distribution for the red one, and then you have the average age in these groups. So what you see is that the richest 10% in terms of financial wealth, there the average age is 60 years, while in the poorest decile, the poorest 10% of the financial wealth distribution, the average age is 30. So that's another way of illustrating this age pattern that you see in the financial wealth distribution, which is that it's extremely concentrated. More wealth is concentrated among older people. And then we have the blue one, which is total wealth. So that's the combination of after we've added human wealth as well. And then we see that the older people here are more in the bottom. So the average age in the bottom, the poorest 10% are around 50. And then they become younger and younger up until the middle. And then there's basically no pattern for the upper half of the global total wealth distribution. There, the average age is 40 for all groups. So adding this human wealth in one way takes away a large part of this life cycle effect on wealth. And that's because financial wealth is something that you accumulate up to, it's sort of a measure of what you have accumulated up until today, while human wealth will be what you will accumulate until you retire. So that's one way of combining those. Which is what happens here. And we can do a similar analysis for the gender dimension. So here we see a pattern that the share of men is larger in the top and the share of women is larger in the bottom. But it's not extremely large differences. So it's around 60-40 in the bottom and the top. So that is a part of the story, but it does not seem to be the main thing, and it's not as important as the age dimension. Here is, so we have these are global estimates, so we can also look how on the distribution across countries, or here it's aggregated into regions. And this is, here you see that you have a larger share of North America in the very top here. So 10 there will be the top of the distribution, and there you see there's a large share of North America in the top, and you have Africa is more concentrated in the bottom of the distribution, and you have China here, for example. So this is very similar to what you see for another, if you look on the global distribution of income, for example. So human wealth and financial wealth on a country level are very strongly correlated. So countries that are richer in terms of financial wealth are also richer in terms of human wealth. But then within countries, it's, if you look on different age groups, it's instead negatively correlated. So that's what drives these differences we find, not these regions, because there is not a big difference. Okay, and then the final analysis here will be looking at some trends. So here's the financial wealth Gini coefficient since 2000, and it's basically a flat trend. So there's not much been happening on a global level for financial wealth. The Gini has been around 90% for the last 20 years. We see a bit more of a trend in total wealth when we combine it with human wealth. Here we see actually decline in the Gini coefficient for the first half of the 2000s, and then it's flat and increasing a bit in the end. So we can decompose this into the inequality that comes from financial wealth and from human wealth for this total wealth trend. And then we see that this trend here is driven by an increase in inequality for financial wealth and combined with a decrease in inequality for human wealth. So human wealth inequality has been falling over this period, while financial wealth inequality has been increasing. And then the total wealth is a combination of those. We can also decompose it into inequality that comes from between and within countries. So we have the total wealth inequality, and this trend is, here we see this increase in inequality within countries and a decrease in inequality between countries. So there's been convergence in total wealth between countries, but divergence within countries. So that's what we see here. And then the net effect is the blue one.
So that between country, what are you looking at exactly there? You take the inequality for a whole country compared with another country, or?
Yeah, so you decompose it into inequality that comes from, so the within would be the average Gini within a country, and between is sort of the rest of the
Comparing
inequality.
averages.
So yeah, so within is taking the average, and the other one is comparing average, I guess. Yes.
I think you're going to get a problem with population growth there.
Yes, let's talk about that. Okay. So yeah, to sum up here. Yeah, so here are some different other analysis we do. So we can also look on the compositions for different occupations. And yeah, we do different sensitivity analysis. So the imputation does not seem to make a lot of effects on this, but PPP is important on the level effects, not the trends. China is a large driver of it. I don't know if some of you have seen this growth, the elephant curve sometimes. It's by Branko Milanovic. So we try to do that as well for this total wealth, and we see, I don't know if it's an elephant, but it has part of a trunk. So this is basically the global total wealth distribution, and then you have the growth in different percentiles over time. So this is between year 2000 and 2018, and what Milanovic found, looking on incomes, was that you had high growth in the bottom half of the distribution, and then also high growth in the top. But then low growth in this upper middle part of the distribution. So that gave the shape of an elephant with the trunk there on the top. And we actually see a little of the similar pattern here when we look on total wealth. But I think the trunk in at least his first analysis was sort of larger. Yes, so to sum up, what we see here is that if we expand the wealth definition by also including human capital or human wealth, we see quite different levels in terms of the wealth distribution, both for countries and for the whole world. And the main driver of these seems to be the life cycle patterns. And if we look on the trends, we've seen increasing financial wealth over time, but decreasing human wealth over time. And we've seen increase in inequality within countries, but a decrease in inequality between countries. Yeah, and we're still working on putting all this together, but I'm happy to take your comments and feedback at this point. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk and with new results that are open for many interpretations, I think. So now is the question and answer period. We have people here and then of course people online, and you online write your question in the chat box, write if you have a question, and also your area of study, so we can find questions from different fields which we like. But now Karim has stolen my long list here. But I'll start actually first on the list, very surprisingly, is Karim.
Thanks. Thanks.
Put up your hands again so I can see.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This was super interesting. So I have a question about why you chose to calculate human health as the potential to earn income, labor income over your the remainder of your lifetime, because that gives you kind of a, I see two problems. One is that the measurement of human capital will be dominated by your age, right? Because of course a 20-year-old has more years remaining in the labor market than a 60-year-old. And that kind of, if we want to understand global inequality, that doesn't really capture what we're interested in. Like, we already know that a 20-year-old will remain in the labor market for longer and therefore has more human capital. So it doesn't kind of add that much to that understanding of like whether or not this society is equal or unequal. And the other thing that I see can be problematic with counting it like that is that it's kind of counterintuitive, because when we think about human capital, we think about, as you described it, like the skills and the knowledge and so on, we would normally think that a person, for example, in my age, which is 40 years old, some experience, has more human capital than the version of me that was only 20. I mean, that's a kind of intuitive, subjective experience that I have, at least. And that seems to kind of be contrary to your model. Yeah, so that was just...
Okay, thanks. Yes, so so in the literature, at least in economics literature, there are sort of two strands of literature here. One which talks about it in the way that you talked about it now, that you have more human capital when you become older, and then it's like, then human capital is basically equal education, or it could be skills as well, but something that you accumulate. And then there's the other way of thinking about it in the way that we do here, but that's also why we now call it human wealth, not human capital. To be clear, that we're not talking about the sum of your education up until today. We talk about your the return, the market value on your human capital, and then we capitalize it to make it into a stock. So that's what we do, and then it will be basically, the younger you are, but as you said, that's also in one way natural, that the part of it will be coming from that younger people will have a longer time, so they will get more sort of mechanically. But on the reverse, that's also true for financial wealth. If you're older, you will have had a longer time to save up. And we don't talk about that as much when we talk about financial wealth. So in one way, this is a way of compensating for that by looking on the other side of it. So that's sort of the motivation, I'd say.
So just a suggestion, one way of reclassifying or individuating this could be to calculate the expected financial income and labor income next year from both your capital assets or your financial wealth and from your human wealth. So then a 40-year-old would like expect to have a higher income next year than a 20-year-old, but you can also like compare like my financial portfolio next year versus the one I had when I was 20 or something like that.
Yes, I think so. That's a bit similar to, so there are on income inequality, there are papers looking on the lifetime income, and that would be a bit, so that's quite a similar to what we do, but it's still the flows there, but then you take the average of your whole life cycle. So that, and that's a bit similar to what you suggest. So yeah, we should think more about it. It's related, but it's sort of just another way of doing it. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I was interested more of the on slide 7. You were mentioning that it is assumed that these workers or the people who are subject to this study are assumed to be in the same country and same occupation. When we think about the world today, it is kind of difficult to believe that.
Would you please put the microphone a bit closer to you?
That a person would stay in the same country, same occupation, probably same occupation rather than same country, because there's a massive labor movement in the world. I was thinking of mostly, let's say, an Indian, Pakistan, or a Bangladeshi engineer, IT, mostly. They are educated in their countries, but they most of the time they work for another country or they move to another country. Or Baltic countries, again, IT sector. I think they would fall under ISCO 2 or 3. In that case, I have a little bit hard time to, I don't want to say accuracy, but how do you compromise, or is the data compromised for that kind of differentiation?
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, no, I agree. So this is an important point, and we've been thinking about how to do it. So we would like to include that as well in sort of the estimation. This far, we haven't found a good way of doing it, both in terms of how we should do. I mean, we could add a probability of switching country, but the difficult would be to get the data on this likelihood that we could also combine with these different groups. But I mean, it's not impossible. Yeah, I think we should try to do it in some way to also get at that. And the good thing with it, if we could include it, like find data on those, some kind of way of measuring those probabilities of switching country, but then you would also need to make an assumption of which country you're switching to, so it sort of explodes the whole thing a bit.
Yeah, that complicates the data, and
yeah.
also you have a huge sample
Yeah,
size.
yeah.
When it comes to such huge, massive data, about 2 million, I believe it was, or 1.6 million. So 1.6 million, and especially when you are doing statistics on such a massive data, this was my second question, so I can ask it already. Don't you think that using statistics on such a huge data, I mean, you are cutting off the uneven, so to say, parts, and then it just evens out the differences. And then, I mean, I understand the normalization and the equivalent, but yeah, when it's so many countries and there are movements between those countries, and there is differentiation within a person's lifetime career, there are a lot of differentiations that happen. So how do we, when we especially think about the one of the later slides that you had per country or per region, considering the total wealth. So when we talk about total wealth, could we, or do you assume that this indicates life standard, perhaps? Are you suggesting that, or could it be taken as a life standard indicator?
Yes, in one sense. I mean, I think if you want to get at sort of life standards, maybe consumption or income is a better measure. But
because, for instance, in India or China, Africa, I mean, it was in the bottom. I remember, but I mean, it really, it makes it very difficult. I know that this is a very difficult subject, but
what we have done is that we've also done, so we use the microdata for some countries, and instead of using these groups, we used the actual individual level data, and then we did an estimation of the Gini to see, because here there will be some, as you say, some variation within these groups. So there's also some inequality that we're missing because we take averages for these groups, and when we do that, instead of taking groups, we just take the whole population, and then we will see that so we underestimate the inequality level by 1 to 2 Gini points, basically, by ignoring the variation within these groups. But it doesn't seem to be a huge thing. I mean, it's a couple of percentage points, so it's not nothing, but it's not. I think those capture a lot of the main part of the variation is sort of captured by these groups. But I agree, migration is important, and we have to think about if and how we can do something with that.
Very good. So then the next question is Chandra.
Thank you. So you're probably aware that every year Oxfam comes out with this report of global wealth inequality, and it's always quite obscene. You know, 5 richest men own as much as this much percentage of humanity. And it's really obscene. And I always look at it because, I mean, it's something important.
Yeah.
It's important information. So your paper is Rethinking Global Wealth Inequality, the Role of Human Capital. So when I see, I take it the Oxfam reports don't use this method,
No.
right? So what are you adding?
Yeah.
What is it? What are you adding to what we get from Oxfam? Let's say.
So what we get from Oxfam is, so they usually focus on, they go up in the top and then they go as far up in the top until they found the most obscene numbers sometimes. So it's a bit like that you can put, then you have so many people, how many people you can put on a bus or whatever. But these people will, so what we add here is also claiming that human wealth is also part. It's actual wealth, although we don't observe it in the financial wealth that they look on. But it's like young people that have invested in their education and so on. They have sort of wealth see it like wealth potential or something like that. So they are not, although they might be observed as extremely poor because they maybe have net zero wealth because they have student debts and no wealth. So they will look extremely poor in these standard definitions. But some of them are, but some of them are not, because they have just invested in an education, and over the life cycle they will then become rich, and maybe in the end of their life cycle they will end up on this bus in the very top. So we're trying to add this, expanding the definition of wealth by also including that part. I mean, it's not saying it's not wrong to look only on that's the standard definition of wealth. But we're saying if we expand it to also include this, another dimension of what you could call wealth, then it will look different.
Could I follow up on that? So I thought there was something, but this, I mean, inequality has so many phases and the interpretations are interesting. But I thought you had a slide where you show that the human wealth of those super rich seem to be rather similar to the people who are just a little bit rich at some point. So,
Was this one?
Yeah, so
exactly. So it's pretty similar for the top 10.
yeah,
but
top 10 and mid 40.
And mid 40. Yeah, exactly.
So the interesting thing is you can, if you want to take kind of evaluative perspective on this, that they seem to be rather a matter of luck, because you think that, your human wealth is what should generate, your total wealth, but actually seem to be rather some kind of luck factor that makes a difference between mid 40 and top 10 here. And one might think that luck is arbitrary from a distributional perspective, or people don't deserve it. Just to take one possible way how you could add to this kind of Oxfam discussion.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so this is the share that the top 10 have. So this is a group of 10% of the population, and this is a group that is 4 times as high, because this is
Okay.
group. These are 50 to 90. So although it looks the same here, this is a smaller group.
Yes,
so it's not equal. I mean, they don't have as large. They have as large share of the wealth, but not per person in these groups.
Okay, so if you did see if I understand this, if you did a comparison, let's say between the top 10 and the next decile,
Yeah, then it would be like a fourth of this.
Okay, so they would have much lower. You don't have the human capital here actually. It would be interesting to compare, how much human capital you have and how much wealth you have. I think
Yes, so that was so this one. Yeah, so here you see. So this is top 10 have. This is not the share, but it's the actual wealth, the average wealth per person in the top 10 group. So it's much higher than the next decile. And you see that the share of human wealth is around 50% in the top, but it's 71% in the next one.
Interesting to look at
Yeah.
things too.
Yeah, definitely.
If you want to add to that kind of.
Yeah.
Next one is Pontus.
Thank you. This was thought-provoking, really interesting. So there's a two-part question, and the first shouldn't be seen as criticism because what you've done is already really impressive, but I want to make sure that I understood it correctly. When you estimate the growth within occupations, you estimate it based on historical growth for that occupation. You don't try to say estimate the second derivative, how that occupation's growth rate has changed. No, that's correct, right?
Yeah.
So my question that I know that you don't have the answer to, but which I would like to say anyway to make you go explore that way is, what will happen with this human capital with the entrance of new technology? If you're a lorry driver and those self-driving cars finally arrive, your human capital goes to zero much quicker than pension age. And maybe estimating that would be a way of getting us to reimburse those people.
Yeah, no, as you said, I don't have an answer to that question, but so what we've done for the growth now is that so for an individual, your growth within your earnings in the next period will be basically what those 5-year-old and you earn today. But then we have this growth rate that we add, and then we've done some versions where we look on historical growth, but one where we have projections for growth. But those are not occupation specific, so they are country specific. So we have not used any occupational specific growth rates, but that would be very interesting.
Impossible to do. Eh?
Yeah, I guess
Pretty
so.
good probability there for
Yeah,
for that.
and the best would be if you have projections of growth, earnings growth within different occupations. So then we could definitely do it, and that would be quite cool. Yes, thanks.
Happy with that, Pontus? Good question. Then we have Tim.
Thank you very much. I have two questions, one a kind of small minor question and one sort of a big picture question. So the minor question is, does anticipated future inherited wealth show up in total wealth? I guess if it showed up anywhere, it wouldn't show up in human wealth because that's just looking at expected future labor income, right? So it would have to be in financial wealth, but it wasn't clear to me how it would show up there either, because when you described what goes into financial wealth, I mean, you said it looks at everything, but it sounded like it was something like income plus net value of all assets at a time, right? So I'm not sure whether it's like if my family is rich, but we're different households and, I'm anticipating getting this inheritance. It's not clear how financial wealth would track that. So that's just a question whether that gets tracked at all. And then the big picture question is, it's sort of following up on Kareem's question about why you would want to add this human capital. So you mentioned at the beginning that some people think human capital should be counted as part of wealth. Like, why? What are the kind of underlying normative assumptions here? Does taking that into account help us make better predictions of what distributions of financial wealth will look like in the future, or what's the thing that we're trying to understand and that we advance on by adding this dimension?
Thanks. Yeah, so to your first question, so financial wealth is measured by how much money you have today, or assets, like including house and so on. But so if you get an inheritance, that will be observed when you get it. So if you get it in next year, then it will be observed then. But if you have expectations of future inheritance, they will not be included because they will be with your your parents basically until they die, and then it will show up with you. And yeah, then the question about why we want to add this. So I guess it's sort of a definition of what we want to call capital, or what we want to call wealth. Is it only what you have, like in terms of money, or is it also those skills and competencies that you have? Those could be, like, in a broader definition of wealth, those would also be some kind of wealth. As also, like, cultural capital could be one part of your wealth.
Okay, I was So there's no kind of underlying normative assumption. We're just trying to build a super dictionary. Like what
Yeah, no,
does
so
wealth mean?
yeah, exactly. It's more of trying to broaden the definition.
Couldn't you just give some answer as you gave before that, two people can seem equally poor if you look at the financial wealth, but one has a high education and have taken out student loans.
Yeah.
That might be very important when you think about who to help.
Yeah, no,
So
sure.
it seems rather obvious that there are relevant aspects of this.
Yes, yes.
Good. Okay, let me do a follow-up on that.
Mhm.
What you mentioned that culture, the human capital was not transferable. And I wonder why you thought so, because usually we think that some kind of cultural capital is transferred in families. And there's quite good connection between what kind of education you get and your parents' education and similar things.
Exactly. So it's it's affected by, so your human wealth will be affected by your parents' human wealth, but it doesn't mean that they transfer their human wealth to you. It's like if it will not be taking my human wealth.
A very philosophical distinction.
You're the philosopher, not mine. But
affected or transferred.
Exactly, but it will not take away the wealth from your parents by giving by that.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not transferred in that way. That I take some of my human capital and give it to you. My level of human capital will affect your human capital, but I will not transfer my human capital to you.
But is that relevant
In
this context?
It's is it relevant? It's like I mean, I included it here as a motivation for why it will become zero when you die, because then the human capital, which is measured with the individual, will become zero when he or she dies, because that cannot be transferred to someone else. Then it can affect the accumulation of human capital of other individuals. Yeah.
Olle had a follow-up on this. Sorry, Olle. I
No.
didn't mean to steal your question.
Yeah. So that was the same question, but I was thinking, I mean, let's say that you compile all your knowledge and you sum it up in a book, and the book is being inherited by your kids or by, I mean, is that then on your account now being considered as financial wealth being inherited by them? And I also, just wanted to press that issue about what's the relevance of having this, it becomes zero when you die, or it.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's summed up in a book and that book has some value, it will be transferred in terms of financial wealth, not in terms of if your kids read that book and they get higher payoff on whatever they do when they work because they've read that book, then it will show up in their human wealth. That's how it works.
Okay, thanks.
We should go on, and now I think it is Andre online. Huh? Can you get online? Should I wait for him for next, or can he get?
Hi.
Hey.
Hey.
You will have to hear a disembodied voice because I don't have a video. So I think this is an amazing combination of data. You have done some kind of a tremendous work. So my question is the connection between concept and measure, right? So you are measuring the net present value of expected future labor income, and you call it human wealth or human capital, and you place it within the individual. But doesn't that miss the kind of contextual part of income, the society? So if I'm a 30-year-old woman with a vocational degree in carpentry, my net present value of expected future labor income will be very different if I live in Sweden or if I live in Turkey. And that has nothing to do with my individual traits. So why is this human and not societal capital?
Thanks. Yeah, so it will be exactly. So it will be a combination. So it also include the societal capital, if you like, because it will be much higher in richer countries, for example. But it's a good point, and what we could do that we have not done enough, I think, is to decompose it in that way. So we can look on how much of it comes from if we compare people with the exact same gender, age, occupations in different countries, compared to comparing exactly. So we could sort of net out what would be the societal part of it, I think. So now it's a combination, but we could do a clean one where we take out the effect of the societies by sort of comparing the same groups in different countries. We haven't done that, but it's an interesting point.
Happy with that, Andrew? He seems to be. So,
Yes, thank you.
Mats.
All right, thank you. So this is great. First of all, I very much agree that we should try to get some sort of measure of human capital into this. Second, though, I think you guys are cheating a bit. Because you do take the net when you look at the financial wealth, right? But you, for some reason, are not counting net when you're doing the human wealth, which drives a lot why younger people are have such higher human wealth than older, because you're only looking at their income. But if I look at this from a kind of an investor's point of view, I would not just, the present market value of a worker is not just that person's future income, but it's also the net of kind of keeping that worker alive, if you want.
So sorry, what would you net out from?
The costs of the maintenance
living.
cost, the cost of living for that worker, which might differ for the different groups you have, men and women, a little bit. It will differ a lot between countries, and it will differ a lot between kind of expected life. So why aren't you doing that?
No, but that's a great point. So we've been thinking about that. So I think that would be, when we think about it at least, that's a bit of a different concept, but which is interesting in its own, and maybe even more interesting, if you like. But that would be like, so for income you have these measures of lifetime income, and what we could do also, but we're not exactly doing, would be a measure of lifetime wealth, maybe. Which would then be this kind of thing, I think.
Or lifetime kind of a disposable income or something like that. Lifetime income above what you need to kind of keep your machine going.
Yes, exactly. And then you almost come back to actually measure just looking at income. But we still want the stocks here. So that's the wealth difference from looking only on your lifetime disposable income, which you suggested.
Yeah, but I just want you to kind of remove the kind of average cost of living, the depreciations of labor, if you want, because otherwise, that's what drives a lot of this. Why younger people have such much higher human capital.
Which
and that's conceptually is strange.
Yeah, we will think about it more. So in these, so we have not invented this sort of measure of human capital. There you never take away that. So it would be changing that definition a bit. But I agree, it make it more comparable to the wealth, which is how much you have saved up. It's not how much you have earned until that point. So we should probably do something with it.
There's time for more questions. But if not, so join me and thank Olle for this. We have some more seminars coming up. We have on May 29th, we have Theron Palmer. He's going to talk about future suffering. And then on June 5th, we have Malcolm Fairbrother, our own Malcolm Fairbrother, who's going to talk about explaining environmental success and failures. And June 12th, we have a rather special talk by Palle Dahlstedt, who's a professor of interaction design and software engineering. And I don't know yet what he's going to talk about, but I'm sure it's going to be interesting. So welcome very much at those occasions.